Hello, sir.
Hello, how are you, Jose?
Thank, thank God. Even though that's going to be like part of the discussion, like what does he mean? Thank God. Uh,
You
thank
don't
God I'm
have.
doing.
It's okay. It's okay. You don't have to go all the way there. Just
I
just
got you. I got you. I got you. Thank God I'm doing well. Uh, Tough week a little. My brother, his lost some friends, and his commander lost his legs, unfortunately. So it was a very hard time for him.
sorry to
And
hear that.
he also does like fascinating work. He works for this unit called Mirol, and they do a lot of things with mapping. But like right now, they're looking for, they're still looking for some bodies out there and on the like that are missing or unaccounted for. So he was telling me about this amazing idea that they came up with, how they basically asked I don't know what it's called in English, Rashuta Teva Vaganim, but like basically like the nature.
Kind of like Parks and Rec, right?
Right, exactly, kind of like the Parks and Rec, and he asked them to triangulate any information they had on, let's say, eagles, hawks, buzzards, and things like that. And then through the triangulation, they find where the buzzards keep on coming down, and then they found like bodies over there because like the eagles were like. So that's pretty, it's nuts. It's amazing. It's crazy.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah, exactly. It's heartbreaking, and it's hard. It's hard for me to also see my older brother that way. I mean, obviously, everyone knows someone, but like I, thankfully, haven't didn't get to hear devastating news on my end personally yet. So it's very hard for me to see my brother struggling that way. But you have a say there. Um, so that was on that end. Work wise, things are going well. Still, still a little slow just regards to like the whole market, but very busy. Clients still coming in. Um, I need to do some fundraising for this Noah Hyde organization movement I'm working with, but like now is like not necessarily the best time to be asking like for money from Jews when it's like they're like, who do you want to donate to? Like non-Jews that like I don't know, like they're very like Israel focused right now. So um, interesting times. Um, and then I go back and forth, like when there's like lulls, quote unquote, in the day, or not even lulls, because the cab driver or the person in the store, everyone's talking about the state of where we are right now. So there's a lot of things. How are things? How are things? I'm as good as my people are. Things will be better. Um, so there's that in the air, and unfortunately, from like a political point of view, I don't know how much of this has to do. I'm sure there's some blame that has to do with like just like the unique situation where like it's like there's a lot of unknowns. Uh, Second, I'm sure that has to do also with the fact that it's being very sensitive information, like their military plan and like the all the people that have been kidnapped. But it also feels like there's a lack of leadership, so that's also very that's also like looming in the air. Um, I guess that's how I've been, but generally speaking, thankful and happy to be here and alive. How about you?
Yeah, it's still rough. I guess there's kind of sinking in of the feeling that you know the magnitude of the event, both what happened on October 7th, the I would say both. It's more than two things. Like what happened on October 7th, the actual war we're in right
Yeah.
now, and the global context in which it all fits, and what it means for how to be a good person in this age, right? How to, like, to myself, to what I need to be attentive to what I need to cultivate myself, to respond to everything. And it's kind of a sinking feeling of that sort of weight, which I think, whether we like it or not, is on our shoulders. Right? We're the people alive right now, and that puts the responsibility on us. And a part of that is just figuring out what the hell that responsibility is. Like, what are we to do? I guess I wanted to go to what you were saying right just now about leadership, and I think our conversations have been pretty peaceful so far, but there's I feel like we have built some level of trust where I can kind of lay down the things that I feel like that are sort of accusations, and things where I feel, you know, I have grievances. And I don't know if it's specifically with you, but like for now, I
Who
think,
I represent.
yeah, you're definitely in a group that I'm not a part of, right?
Yeah.
So the I guess the topic is like limits, or a lack of limits in political discourse and action, right? That's generally what I feel is weighing on me, and the sense uh, that I'll put it like as a general statement, a lot of limits for many years have been crossed by the right wing and the people who I feel are, let's say, sane enough, composed enough, far thinking enough, which I think you're a part of. Like I see those qualities in you. I don't feel enough of them have risen up to stand against that whenever that serves maybe their agenda. And I can give a lot of examples, right? Like we can start with, say, uh, the hate campaign, right? 2020, Nathan Eshel recording. We can talk about the massive campaigns of delegitimization of anyone basically not on board uh, with these agendas, like the leftist traders campaign, uh, and definitely further on the uh, very intense defamation of anyone opposing Bibi throughout these 10 months, anyone opposing the judicial reform. When I mentioned it last time, I remember you said, yeah, I wouldn't go protesting because I think that the reform is positive, and that kind of ticked me off in the sense that that's not the point. Like, it doesn't matter whether you think it's positive when all of those borders have been crossed, right? Like there's a point when the party that's promoting it is sporting a primary member who's saying he's happy for 6 million who were burned in the Holocaust and hopes 10 million more would burn.
I
It's
know you're talking
exactly.
about. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know when the police is protesting in uniform against internal affairs, the department that needs to investigate police. So protesting against the law in front of the investigation of someone for brutality against civilians, and in all of those cases, it just seemed like, the people that raise their voice are just, the ones who have been raising it for years. No one is standing up from the opposite end and saying like, whoa, whoa, No, this is not what I meant. I cannot keep supporting this, even if my agenda is, important to a large degree. How can we be crossing those limits? This is not the way. How do you see that?
So I, like you said, as far as you gave many examples, I'm going to first respond. I'm trying to think if that's the right way to do this. Okay. Firstly, I would say I definitely hear you. Nothing you're saying to me sounds like out of left field, and I think there's and all the examples you gave are valid. Um, then I'll get on the tail end. I'll get back to like as far as your comment about like why I wasn't protesting, but first I'll go to the comment about, let's say, hate campaign, or let's forget the examples like limits have been crossed. I think you and I agreed about this with regards to like where the media went, but I would also venture, and this is not a whataboutism, but it's just a fact on the ground that like there are places where I could pinpoint and say like here the quote unquote left went too far, or here this was like ridiculous. So unfortunately, I have like my own grievances, quote unquote, with let's say the left quote unquote camp. However, while I think there are deep rooted, let's say, um, issues or differences that I have with, let's say the left and center camp, I do think that a lot of the radicalization on their end is a response to the right. I'm not saying that like again that's an excuse. I just understand that a lot of people in Israel on the left, center left, definitely over the last, let's say, 20 years or so, have been feeling like there's a lot's not going their way. We'll put it like in the general. Yeah, I take that back. That's not a good way to frame it. I think they feel like a lot of I think they've been feeling like they're being attacked, and I think some of those sentiments are justified. I think some of them are. This is just this is like the political game, basically. Like there's things that are uncomfortable, obviously, uh, as in there's another side or there's another agenda, and like not everything's always going to be hunky dory, and people also have to realize like in the world we live in, uh, not everyone's smiling all the time, obviously. Like people have this sense sometimes of like when people go back to what it was, there was like Israel's political history has a tremendous amount of violence in it, obviously. So like I'm just saying, like it's not like I'm remembering this time where everyone is always like saying speaking to each other beautifully. However, I think, and this is maybe you'll agree, maybe you'll disagree. I think the religious factions of the right, and at times they weren't even considered right, but let's say the religious faction, their elite and their alliance with the right has, uh, in many cases, exacerbated the relationship between the right and the left and the center, and has pulled the right into places where uh, um, it's forced to act. And that's why I think like Bibi is an example of someone that like is not actually quote unquote as far right as people paint him to be, but I think he keeps on putting himself in these situations where he ends up building governments where they become very problematic with their own agendas. And I think limits have been crossed. Specifically for me, like I we could have disagreements economically, like what's the proper way to go about with regards to your economic plan for your nation. However, religiously speaking, I think, and this is coming from a religious person, I think there's been a lot of moves that have been extremely counterproductive, and they're pressing on like nerves with regards to Israel. So I totally understand like where your anger is coming from. I think I speak now. I think less so in the past, but like over the years, I think there's more and more people that might feel like dispossessed on the right, which they may feel like politically right, but like don't really see any leadership. Part of it has to do with, like you said, with Bibi Netanyahu completely getting rid of anyone in his circle that could ever rise to power and really just wiping those people out, and that have left us in a position where there really aren't alternatives, so to speak, or the way I see them, there aren't alternatives, at least. And, you know, as someone who voted for Bennett in the past because I thought there was like a different alternative, and that's like, and I mean, multiple times, but let's say also once for, let's say, prime minister, I didn't hold up against him, that whole move. I would agree that the right has completely changed its face. And I don't know if we spoke about this in the past. While I consider myself national religious, that's my party was hijacked. Like that no longer represents what I believe in. And that also alludes to, you know, the Avi Sagi's work, just with regards to, so like where I like, and I have my issues with him, but like where I find myself like in that camp, it's like, it's a little more complicated than just like, we've gone through progressions over time. So like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, that's like not, those are not people that represent me or the way I see.
So my question to pinpoint it is, Avi Sagi has been in the protests, and he's been speaking at the protests, right? So, like I'm asking. I understand that these, you know, these are not your opinions, because if they were, I wouldn't be talking to you, because you would be insane, right? And that's not something I like to do. And yes, I'm like going there because we have Minister of National Security who's been convicted of 8 charges. One of them is aiding terrorism. That is an insane situation. That is not sane. No country would look at that on the face of it and say like, that's legit, right? That is insane.
I'm just throwing this out there. I agree with you. I don't want him to be in power or anywhere near power. However, I'm just pointing out something that, like, I'm just throwing this out there. This is not like a cooked up idea that I walk around thinking and why I think. I'm just saying I could also understand how, to some, they see him as like a necessary element. No matter, it doesn't matter how repugnant he is, due to the fact that they see, like, let's say in the UN, a corrupt body, and that is a tremendous, powerful body, and they're looking at it as playing fire by fire, fighting fire by fire. And that's not an excuse. I'm just saying you're living in a world where, let's say, people talk about, like, what about the war crimes Israel are doing? Put aside whether they are or they're not. What about the war crimes of America and Turkey? And like everyone's war criming. So like there's a sense where like you're like, this guy is horrendous. So is Donald Trump, and they're different. But we're living in a gaga world. So I'm not saying that's what I want my leader to be. I'm just saying it's not in a vacuum. It's not like, how is this happening?
I mean, I understand that it's not in a vacuum. And again, I think that to me is a part of this limit crossing, because the notion, right, when you put someone like that in power, what I read it as is everything's too corrupt, just burn it all to the ground, right? Burn our institutions, burn the social solidarity. Like nothing can be fixed. Nothing has hope. So let's just go like all the way insane, right? Because again, like that doesn't even have the appearance. Like this isn't even sly, right? This doesn't have the appearance of legitimacy, right? So it just means, you know what? Screw the rules, right? That is a sentiment that I think is very much alive in these, let's say, political trends.
I don't necessarily even know if it's screw the rules. I think it's unfortunate. Like it's showing a completely lack of understanding of what the rules are in a certain sense, or how the rules like apply. Like I mean, like I think there's a very big difference between, let's say, how Yariv Levin understands the law and how Ben Gvir understands the law, and both you could disagree with both of them. I just think one, like Ben Gvir, has just literally no place in those like sacred halls, and other ones you could disagree with completely politically, but at least like he, he should understand how the system works at a certain extent. But I would also say, just to continue with this little mind experiment for a minute about like burning it all down, and not to a cliche of like it's always darkest before the dawn, but there is a sense that like as a society there is a breakdown of leadership, and there is a breakdown, I'm saying, whether you from leadership all the way to the words we use. So and you could even look at the war going on in Gaza, and like the questions of dealing with like, is it proportionate, is it not proportionate? These are all elements of the world completely being uncertain with their morality, where they stand, who their leaders are. So this is part of the meaning crisis, obviously, and it's very apropos that we're discussing this, because this is also on the grounds that we're meeting each other, right? Like in this zone, and I obviously what we're doing right now is trying to bring it as close as we can back to home, outside our actual, let's say, house, right? But even you're saying like, what do I as an individual do? And you gave the example of like, the very least I did, I stood out there and I said no. And Chaz, you're saying like, but you're not going to stand there and say like, no. If I recall correctly, I said there were elements where I could see myself, yes, coming out and standing with you. And I just said like at the time,
I just said you would sign a petition if you were sure that it would get Netanyahu off. So
right.
Like, I mean, like so, that's a bit like.
I'll give you. So I'll answer you like why I. By the way, why I wasn't there then, or why I'm not there now.
I guess my grievance starts with then, but if you're not there now, I guess we talked about it. Like,
yeah, I think we spoke about like why I think like practically not now, even though I think
it's going there, and I think you're like, because the protests appear to be already kicking up, and
right. So right now, that like to me is like, it's upsetting right now that like I don't like. Well, two things. The protests, let's say, against.
Leave that for later. Okay.
Okay.
I think like
I just want to point out that, let's say, there was talk right now that, let's say, Yariv Levin was going to try to start up this like reform again. So like that to me is like, you got to be out of your goddamn mind. That like is bananas to me. Like Bibi,
he literally made moves. He wasn't talking about it. Like
by the way, I totally didn't I didn't read up on it at all, so I really don't know. I heard that like something happened, and this is different than him needing to appoint judges. That's like something else that everyone wants him to do. There's some other move that he was doing that like somehow was related to the reform. Really, I just like I didn't even look at it. So that to me is just like bananas. Like there should be like that word even shouldn't be spoken. Like there should be like even reform being spoken. The question of like, should Bibi apologize? I couldn't give two shits. Okay.
And he should just go. I don't care if he apologizes.
No, my point is like this, when this is over, he should leave. I don't need at all him to be like, I'm sorry. Like it's like, I don't need it. So like,
I don't care. I don't think anyone cares. He just needs to be gone. Like,
well, yes, I think our conversation is like whether or not like, and if I knew, the question is it going to be to the detriment of the war efforts and rescuing the captives now, if he leaves or not? I still think that it's relevant. A big part of that is also his relationship to the Saudis, and also the pressure that the Saudis can be doing behind the curtains as well. There's other elements obviously at play. So I would think that's too risky. But going back to your question about like, but back then, Chazi, why were you not there? I wasn't there because I should clarify, and you might not like this answer, which is okay. I did go to like open house events where there was discussion, dialogos between different sections and different parties of the society and different voting blocks. And I wanted to be there for that discussion and hear people's grievances. So as far as I'm concerned, like being involved and being part of my people and trying to like understand better is something I was partaking in. Being part of the protests, which I saw as being hijacked because it was clearly a natural like a natural occurrence, and I don't think it was like drummed up by like by like four people that wanted to just bring down the government. However, there is a tremendous amount of political interest that made this way inside, and money that made its way inside, and the way the media was discussing these stuff to me was just, it was tainted. And that's why I didn't want to associate with that. But it wasn't like I was in a pro Bibi rally. And I could understand saying like, if you're not with us, you're against us attitude. I'm not saying you're saying that. I'm just saying I could understand people being like, silence is like, it's not an answer, it's not a response. So again, I felt personally, I'm speaking to the people to make sure that I'm not like living necessarily in a bubble, so to speak. And I'm against this, but but for all the reasons I just mentioned, I felt like being on the street was not really representing what I believed in. But again, it was because of the framing. Because I know this sounds like so naive. I
want to just like stress that I don't necessarily want you or anyone who disagrees with those protests to go and stand in Kaplan Street in Tel Aviv, where all of the protests are, right? But I think the minimum right to apply pressure to the politicians or to the party center, to the people that you have access to that I don't, right? To say, look, I can be against these protests, I can be pro-reform, but there are limits that you guys have to keep. And we've seen, let's say in the Bennett government, right, the effect of that, the effect of people within the social circles of Bennett's party that were just harassing I don't know if harassing, like you might put it in a negative light, right, but just relentlessly making the point to those politicians that they are not happy with them being in the government and that they should resign, that they should bring down that government, was eventually what brought it down after 1 year, right? It wasn't like some external power. It was these people, and the ability to do that on the side of the extremists, which is the current government and the people that brought it about, compared to the inability, and I really don't see how I can take that on our side, right? Because we are not their people. We're not the ones. You can maybe say for Avi Dichter or something, but I don't know what the hell is going on with him, and no one, like his friends, don't know what the hell is going on with him. So I don't know about that, but generally, like to say we're, let's say, pro-reform, but not like this, right? We can have differences of opinion, but you've crossed the line. And instead, we get literally the person who was saying, I'm happy for 6 million Jews burned, after a very kind of heartless apology or how is it called? Ginui.
To condemn.
Yeah, a very weak condemnation of what he was saying. He stayed in the party and kept doing his thing, right? Like, and this isn't even the first time he's been guilty of general hate speech. So, like, there's a point where I would say, if, like, from my view, it's really hard to reach out to people on the other side, to trust people on the other side when I see, like, okay, if they're not speaking up against this, if we're going through everything we're going through, and we are not like seeing, this is not taken into account, and all we can see online, right? Because we don't have like we're all biased, right? Our social circles are eventually not going to include that many people with different opinions. Then how can we see the world differently? Like the breakdown of trust, the breakdown of social solidarity, how can that not be more important to you? Like to you, the general you?
I I well, the discourse question, unfortunately, I feel that there's always more people on the right willing to talk than there are on the left. With regards to just like having like a very open uh, uh, discussion, I always find that like there isn't someone there that wants to go the distance and really like plow through issue by issue and figure things out. And obviously the discord with our political leaders is horrible. But you also see the discord on the streets is like, and on the news, it's always fighting. And um,
But again, like I'm not even saying go and talk to people on the other side. I'm saying express your own
but what does that mean?
discomfort. It means, for one, like I said, you make public statements, you make tweets, you make op-eds, you make
Well,
videos,
I mean, so,
whatever. You
but I
make videos. When I hear you talking, when I heard you talking with Jacob at the start of this thing, and when I heard you talking even just I don't know, a week ago, when Jacob mentioned a military coup that we had, like that that framing and the way that like the somehow just over 1 million people in total can be
I do think there was that, but like I agree with that though. They're like, I think the army was completely out of control.
so again, right, first of all, like we can argue on that, and I think like that's, regardless of being completely out of control, that's not a military coup for a lot of reasons, but the the lack of, first of all, ability to express that with nuance, and yes, that is very important.
Sure, I
If
agree.
you want to say something like that, like to
Just
just
like Israel is not a fascist, but just like Israel is not a fascist state. When people saying like Israel, like Bibi's a dictator, like there's nuance there, obviously, right? Like we're not an apartheid state actually, and he's not actually a dictator, and we're not actually a fascist state. Like these are sentiments. So like there wasn't actually a coup, but these are all like this as part of this is it's all war crimes and it's all horrible and it's all up to 100 all the time. So there is nuance, and this is part of the argument, which is like if you want to dig in deeper, I'm not saying I'm requiring this, but my attitude in general, like in this mode, my attitude is like, if you want someone to give you nuance on like that term, then I want nuance on this term and that term and that term. And then like if we say
the opponent cannot be the one determining your morals. That's how I see it. And the fact that the right is calling this a military coup, which is completely, I think, wrong to frame it at that for many reasons,
sure,
the that doesn't excuse me from having to talk specifically about why this reform is counter to democracy, why the castrating of the judiciary, is
even
very
that term,
dangerous.
right? Like even that term, like I'm castrating it, like according to the way you see it, obviously being framed.
All right, I mean, again, like I'm using that term, and I am using it carefully. Like you're disempowering the judiciary for making judicial criticism over the legislation of laws. Now you have, I don't want to again go
Right,
to
we don't need to.
reform, but I don't use it lightly, right? Like it's removing a significant, like the whole set of the laws, not just the improbability clause, which is a very small part of it. But they had the laws were on the table, right? 225, I think, to exactly what what end they were aimed at was, I think all I'm trying to say is that when I say castrating, what I was saying, like removing the teeth of the judiciary and its ability to affect decision-making process, I'm not using that lightly. I can, and I am trying to use as much nuance and accuracy as I can with my words. And all I'm trying to point to in this claim is that my responsibility to do that has nothing to do, or is not affected by the fact that neither people on my side nor people on the other side would just completely throw nuance out the window. I still need to do it.
I 100% agree with you. And my point was like earlier about, let's say, not joining the protest is because I think there was nuance missing. And if your point was, when I was talking to Jacob, I don't know if you were mentioning that I said it or he said it, but like him or I didn't clarify, then, there's no argument there. Obviously, like I can't tell you what exactly we were discussing then and like what was the flow of the conversation. But yes, I definitely think those things need to be flushed out and discussed. And that's why I think even when we talk about terms like the ultra-Orthodox or the Arabs in Israel, or all these terms all have their own nuance elements, and we have to break them out. And then we have to discuss them like in certain time periods. And it's like one good thing that's silver lining about this war is you see like a lot of people online are like just doing a lot of reading about Israel. And then you get to see people for the first time real like the amount of like nuance in this discussion is like between every year and like whose fault was it? And like, so I'm with you. And it going back to like using that nuanced conversation to say on Chazi, on your side, there should be people coming up and saying like, listen, while we agree with X, like this and this and this, we're completely against.
So, yeah, and then I'll just clarify it.
Sure.
Only because, not because you have to do it in every single case, but when the limits, when the borders are crossed so dramatically as they have been, right? This isn't when I can look and say like, probably people just don't care. We have a person convicted of terrorism in the government, and like the amount of outcry that I hear from the right wing is next to zero. It's like, great, he got a lot of mandates, and now Bibi's in power. Great, our agenda is being promoted. Great.
Well,
this is such a huge deal, and no one's like I just can't.
I'm gonna frame it to you. The sentiment you hear, right? I'm going to give it to you, let's say, from the left. Now, it's not fair because this person was just through like a traumatic travesty. But one of these people that survived the massacres on the 7th of October mentioned, she says like, so Smotrich wasn't so wrong. Right? Now, about wiping out Hawara, like that sentence he said about getting rid of it. Now, I'm not taking her too seriously because what she went through and she's grieving and she's angry. There's a lot of people that said, listen, I think like Ben Gvir is like, he's not leadership material, all these things. But like him and this other guy were saying that this is going to happen, that that's what's going to happen. That this is good now. And then they have a horrible thing like this go on, right? This empowers extremists. This empowers those people that have that voice and say, you could look at this and say like, great. So like a broken clock is right twice a day. But besides that, like the guy's nuts. And a lot of people feel like this is the voice. He represents the voice that's getting like squashed down. Again, to clarify, I don't want him there. I didn't vote for him. I think he's an extremist. There are people out there that say, and it was just because how Israeli political systems work, he wasn't voted in with like a tremendous majority. Obviously, that is still a minority of Israel that's interested in him due to power plays in the Knesset. He has a very, very prominent position. You would agree to that? That it's not that.
Yeah, but he got like 13 mandates, right? Am I remembering the number correctly?
I don't think that's true. You mean when they joined together at that point?
Yeah, together I think it was 13 mandates.
No, that's obviously. I could be wrong about this. I definitely remember him earlier on when he had like very like low numbers. He obviously tried multiple times to get into the Knesset and was.
Yeah,
he
I
never
just
made it
remember
through.
about this government. I'm pretty sure they
So,
have that.
so I would have to check my stats like on what his number was. But my point being that like I still don't think he represents even the majority of the right in Israel. And this has to do with what I was said earlier about these conflicting ideals of, let's say, you have the right wing, which has this religious anchor politically in a certain sense that keeps pulling him to a certain direction, right? Which has to do with like land and settlements. And that always ends up creating these unholy alliances. But I think there is like, let me take a step back. You had people like, you have a lot of people in the media, whether it's Makor Rishon or whether it's other, let's say, more right affiliated columnists, reporters, all having many issues with how the reform was going. Amit Segal and Arel Segal, and a lot of these people were, while they're still pro-right, they came out with many articles and on the news and online talking about their issues. I'm putting aside Channel 14, okay, with their elements. You hear there were many voices on the right that were still coming out against the way this was being done, the speed in which this was being done. There are members of Knesset, like Galit Distilian. Obviously, she's gone right now. Her whole office basically was shut down because they realized how unnecessary it was. So there is a certain reckoning, which I think is far from over. But I think there were voices on the right that came out against it. I think what people wanted, and this sort of has to do with some sort of level of, let's say, purity tests that you see, which is like there was a certain all or nothing. Like if you condemn this, then like really you should be against him. And people felt like they were being pushed sometimes to be like either it's the end of democracy or like even if I say I agree with these 5 lines, it's still over. Now you said, Chazi, I saw protesters standing with me. They were right wing, right? And they're like they're pro that, but like they thought that this was going too far. So I could totally understand that. And I totally know a lot of people that were like that. And that was also a lot of the sentiment, unless it was wrong. Like the media was saying, a big part of Israel, from the right and from the left, everyone's there. So did you feel that there was true? Do you feel like there were a lot of people from the right and that were like pro right wing agendas, generally speaking, but just against like Bibi?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if a lot, because how would I be able to measure that, right? I didn't.
But that goes to your question.
People, but well, again, if you want, let's put it like this.
I just want to frame this again, because you're saying like, where are you? Not the collective you raising your voice. So you could be like, well, you saw them at the right. They were reporting. They're all there. All the people. 10 months. Everyone's coming to the streets. There's a lot of people there from the right. That was them. You're saying like, where was the rest of the country? Like, why is not everyone there?
Sorry. Yeah. Mainly, I'm saying that when it came to the hard issues, right, that for me are just insane to be even discussed, right? Like the fact, again, that you have like there are so many insane things, right, that are going on, and even this discussion kind of feels surreal, right? Because it feels like the attempts to kind of put real kind of nuance. It's kind of like philosophizing in the way that, I don't know, let's say take some insane period of history, right? Like philosophizing how Nero was actually a great emperor. Like there's a sense that there's a point where how to frame this. There's a point where there has to be kind of a stand with sanity, like and there's a point where you have to kind of let go of a lot of the things you maybe have agendas for. And one of the things, I guess, is at the base of that, the way I see it, is that I don't think the right, you could say that, for both sides, but I don't think the left exists politically, and I don't think it's guilty of that, but it doesn't matter because it doesn't exist. I don't think that the right wing in Israel, and this goes from Ben Gvir, Smotrich all the way to Yair Lapid, that they believe in any valuable contribution that people that don't think the way they do has to offer.
I just want to make sure I understand correctly. You think anyone from all the far right of, let's say, Ben Gvir until, let's say, center right, being, let's say, Yair Lapid. I mean, obviously he wouldn't see himself that way, but let's say center right Yair Lapid. All those people, it's their way or the highway, as far as they're concerned.
Yeah, I think it's not maybe there where they can consider compromises, right? Okay. But they're not interested. They don't see, and this is a global phenomenon, but in here, this is the politics, right? They don't see the other side as their, partner or even, interlocutor in any way. And I think that it has become, and Smotrich kind of expressed the zeitgeist very well, like, it's okay that we're doing this reform because we're only going to be in power for 4 years, and then the other side can just bash us, for however long they get to be in power, and that's how democracy is. And that's not how democracy is, right? Like that's not how a functioning society runs itself. And to me, when you see the one of the reasons that I'm talking about, like, that it's very misleading to call this a military coup, right? You have masses of people that are dedicated and have, dedicated their lives literally and definitely their free time, right? Like to this country and what it means, and they are being mocked, ridiculed, ignored, and just pitted against. And the sense is like, the general spirit that was going to say was like, screw them. Anyone who doesn't agree with us, screw them. We don't need to talk to them. And to me, like, that's a very deep misunderstanding. Like, it's not about coercing you to do what we want you to do. It's about if we're willing to go this far because something is that intolerable, right? Then something's wrong. And
wait, one second. If we're willing to go this far, being what, like the protests?
Yeah, the protests, okay. and many people in the army that signed, non-volunteering letters. To think that these people, there are no other instances, right? Like, this isn't. Oh, there are actually from the right wing when it came to evacuating settlements, right? Then it was okay to refuse an order and to not obey it, and no political powers.
Wait 1 second.
Yeah.
As in trying to say that during the disengagement, like, there was a lot of, like, disobeying orders.
I'm saying that there were notable cases and that there was no political.
Because rabbis came out, rabbis and leaders, political leaders, unlike what happened right now, political leaders came and said no one should disobey an order, and rabbis said people shouldn't disobey an order. Yeah, there was a few that did that, but, like, I don't think at all that was, like, if anything, that was used as that was used by the right to say, like, look, when we had this, we didn't do that. No one threatened that we're not going to join and we're not going to fight. And over 50% of officer school and the officers in the army are religious. And
religious is not the only thing, right? Like, it's not just a religious secular separation in here.
It is and it isn't ultimately, but like that's like, I mean, I believe a lot of that has to do with, like, you know, that's undergirding a lot of what's going on over here. But
but I'm just like, specifically, there was, I think, 68% support for the disengagement or something like that. Not that it matters, but it's not like this was a secular versus religious issue.
No, my point was there was a fear that within the religious soldiers there would be like a lot of them disobeying orders, specifically from religious.
Like in practice, they like, it was done as Israel often does, which is they were allowed to not participate, right? They made it clear that they don't want to, and then they took other people to do their jobs, and then, you know, still the point is, right? That was a complete segue, and probably I shouldn't have brought it up. But
let's go back to what you were saying about the.
The thing is, even in that case, right? But definitely when you're talking about this case, where is really the heart and soul of the people that make life in this place possible, and I think it's very visible from what happened, like the day that the war.
I have to disagree with that, though. That's the heart and soul. Like, you have plenty of people. You have the 2.3 million people that voted for Bibi are also part of the heart and soul of this country.
They are part of the heart and soul. I'm not saying that these people are the only people that make this possible, but yeah, you're talking about the ones, like, I can say for myself that my level of commitment and contribution to the existence of this place is nothing like that of a fighter pilot that has to stay completely, you know, up to their skills every day, and they are, you know, living that life with all of the complications that go to that. And I think that deserves some respect, right? The people who put
definitely.
So I'm saying, like, and in general, like, every person that signed that sort of letter that is saying, you know, these are people that pride themselves on being in the reserve army, that feel a deep commitment to that. I sat in a park speaking to someone who was saying, you know, I can't stand what's going on, but I'm afraid, right? If I send this letter, that when something happens, I cannot stand the fact that they wouldn't call me because I need to be there, and to have to deal with that, right? And the response from the right in general is like, we're moving forward on basically on your dead bodies, right? Like on whatever, you know, whatever you do, whatever manner of protest you get to, it's all, you know, political games, and we don't care, and we don't want to hear what you have to say. We don't want to negotiate or get to a better.
That's not true. I mean, they did hear what they wanted to say. There were meetings. There's also disagreements within the Air Force. Obviously, they had meetings at the president.
But like this,
I'm saying they had meetings at the president's house. They had. So I'm taking what you're. First of all, again, let's break it down for a moment without getting bogged down in the reform specifically. But let's just the general sentiments. And this, I think, is relating to you saying, like, even in this conversation, you feel like there's like this divide, right? Like, why am I not like there? How am I not seeing what you're seeing? So
it feels like splitting hairs.
It's not that I'm not agreeing with things you're saying, but I'm showing you why it's hard for me. Like, the way I'm hearing it, though, is, let's say, people are on the streets. Israel, like I'm saying, hearing members of Knesset come and say things, or come and say, like, anyone that's going to touch one judge from the Israel court system, or anyone that's going to offer to do any sort of reform, it's horrible. And then you realize, but that's crazy, because last year you said there should be reform, and you said there should be reform, and this guy said, and why are you saying that's completely wrong right now? Why are you saying it's the worst thing in the world right now? And when people use terms like that, like I could come and say, yeah, 6 of these things are wrong and 70 of these things are wrong and this too much. But when someone's looking at me and giving me answers as if a whole slice of the population is living in La La Land, like, no, your rights, no one was bothering your rights, and the courts weren't taking out way too much power, and they weren't being too activist. Like, none of that happened. And there was a sentiment where that's the rhetoric you were hearing. And when you hear that, then of course there needs to be a nuanced answer. You're here, someone's playing a game with you. Someone's denying your reality completely. And then you have a visceral reaction to that. Or when you're saying right now, let's say these soldiers are coming and saying, all these people are signing. This is going to be a harsh example, so bear with me, okay? Obviously there's no resemblance, but would you agree with me that out of the 200,000 protesters due to the Israel-Gaza war that were breaking out in Europe, are all of them anti-Semitic, or are some of them just like being like very ignorant or being fed like just propaganda of things that they should be chanting? Because I don't think all those people want to kill Jews. However, I think there's a lot of media for 10 months telling people things like, it's the end. You don't understand. Like, it will never be the same. The courts are going to get you. You're not safe. The guy's not protecting your children. He's going to send your kids to do battles that are crazy. So then it's the end of democracy. But is that true? Is he going to do all those things? Is it the end of democracy?
Like, once you get, but that goes back to my point. Once you get to a level of insanity that, again, is at the foot of the ruling power, then
sure, their fault.
That is something that you can no longer rule out, right? There are people, again, your minister of police is a convicted terrorist, like convicted of aiding terrorism, and then you tell me, look, there's some laws and some other laws. No, I cannot even begin to trust them, and Bibi has lied throughout his entire career. So arguing about the contents of the laws, right? Basically, you see, this is the plan, right? This is where it's going. It's not a reform. When you talk about like the experts, like I told you, Manny Mountainer and Yoav Dotan, both professors of law, and Manny Mountainer, I heard both him and Yoav Dotan talk. They've been quoted even in Channel 14, right? But in the same misological fashion, right? They quote here, it's like Manny Mountainer said, the courts are aiding the existing elites, and then Manny Mountainer talks about it like that was true up to the 80s, and now like the trend has changed, and there are reforms, but the reforms are different, and the people that are making these reforms are clearly not interested in anything we have to say. So the people, actually living that, in the depths of those discussions, are pointing to that. You go to protest, you hear Yuval Diskin, you hear Bobi Yaron, you hear, former leaders and heads of the security systems and army chiefs, and they're all telling you, this isn't just media. Like, there's a point where you have to go like, no, these are serious people that have generally a wide range of political affiliations, and they're all saying this is not good, and this is going to cost.
But that's again what you need to break down. What is not good? Which part? Because you have people over there that agreed with those things and don't agree now. You have people that agree with some of those things. This is the wrong way to do it. You have people that agree, and this isn't the guy that should be the one leading this. And unfortunately, a lot of this is also muddied with the just no Bibi. And so it's more because I think it's not the problem. If it was just Bibi, it wouldn't be a problem, because I'm with you, right? He shouldn't be the prime minister anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't end over there. There's still that question is like, what should this country look like, right? Where I wrote like, the new Zion, like what is it?
I guess the question is back to the start, right? When the limit is crossed, you agree, the limit has been crossed.
Yeah.
In many occasions, what do you do? Because to me, like, there are limits where, like, it's bring down the government, and if it's the really abhorrent and, unpleasant, just not BB camp, whatever, right? Because the people in power have crossed the line, and now like they no longer can be legitimate rulers. And like by Bibi's own words, which I don't like to quote, but like he has 3 indictments, and that in itself, like that should not have public legitimacy. And
But some are bullshit, and we also know that. And we also know that there was games being played. By the way, I'm with you. The problem is all of this is muddied with people playing games, with people with other agendas. Like once these other files flop, it's just like the Russian collusion with Trump. It just, they wouldn't drop it, and it ruined, because he's a deplorable person. You don't need to make it up. But there's a sense of like, no, it's a Machiavellian about it. Like it's worth it for me to do it because it's going to lead to the downfall of him.
That's exactly what I'm pointing to, this Machiavellianism. And we talked about it in the end of the last conversation. I feel like, all of these notions of armchair strategists just going like, and like I said, I heard Shapiro talk about this, and I heard others, right? Oh, well, I can deal with how deplorable this is as long as it promotes my agenda. And yeah, well, stand with the good, right? That's my point. Yeah, there are a lot of games being played, and it's very solid and it's very political. But there's a certain point, like there's the sense for me, like that there has to be a point where, this has been done by that person. It's very clearly crossing the line, and I need to stand against it. Period. And then, like you might. And I definitely feel the sentiment that you're going like, oh no, right? I could bring something worse with that. But I think like that's an article of faith at the end of the day.
So as a personal journey, right? I decided I wanted to make a difference, right? And I said, like, I'm going to use the Anglo population in Israel, which at the time was like 350,000, let's say, registered voters. And I'm going to try to galvanize them all together as a voting bloc through the Likud, right? So I joined the Likud Anglo and in Jerusalem, and I was trying to like, we're coming from, let's say, like an American democracy. We play the game differently and have these discussions. And then you realize how dirty the system is and how corrupt the system is. And that's the system all across the board. And I'm like, I can't, like, I'm too soft, I guess, for that. You know what I mean? Like, I can't do that. Okay, so I'm just going to live my life. I'm going to be a lawyer. But now as I'm working in a lawyer in this fancy firm in Tel Aviv, I'm dealing with the light rail, the cursed light rail in Tel Aviv, or the blessed light rail in Tel Aviv. It's been going on for like since the creation, a long time. And
basically ravaging all the streets of Tel Aviv, right, and showing no results for years.
So in my previous life, I had to deal with the tender documents for that. Who's going to win to get to do that? And there's Israeli companies, there's German companies, there's French companies, and the bidding's going on. And I'm dealing with this German guy for a while. It's like months of dealing back and forth. And then I'm in a meeting with the partners, and the partners tell me they're talking between each other. And in the background, I'm getting close to this German guy. We're cracking jokes, we're talking. They're like, yeah, we're never going to close with the Germans. That's just like part of the process. We still need to be talking to them. And I'm like, but guys, Hans needs to go see his kid. You understand? Like he had a kid. He's working for hours on a deal that's like never going to happen. And like, yeah, like this is the game. And like the billables. And I'm like, I can't do this. I'm not interested in this system. Like I can't work the system. But that is the game that's being played. And that's why, and much to my chagrin, and this relates to, I didn't listen to all the podcasts, but like I know Avi Segi's work, but this relates to also like what's the end goal agenda, right? So if it's the historic people coming back to the land based on God's decree, right? That's not just a political game someone's playing. So the stakes are in theory higher, while you could be like, oh, well, like we're going to get like clean water or not clean water. Then there's the other element. Well, it's going to be clean water in the Holy Land, or it's going to be this one in the Holy Land, or like all that element starts coming inside. And I think in it at its best, it should elevate the whole conversation. Unfortunately, that's not what it's doing. And that has to do with obviously like a lot of like, in issues with religion and politics, and also how religion expresses itself in Israel. But and that goes all the way back to like what people like me can do, or people like us can do. What we could do is, I'm trying, at least what I'm trying to do is trying to have the most universal conversation I can about Judaism. And that goes to the limits where the Noahites live, Bnei Noach, because that's where I could express the most universal message Israel has to offer, which is also showing that like everyone is welcome. Let's start from like the point that all are welcome. And that's why there's all that religious apparatus around that. And once I could have that conversation, I want to use that to shine back on Israel. But that also relates to, I know this is a silly example, but my son was sitting next to me earlier, and he was getting ready for this test he has in school. And it's about the book. He's studying the book of Exodus. It's on the first portion. And there was this midrash about this donkey that someone had, and it's the same donkey that Abraham rode, and it's a donkey that Messiah is going to ride. Right. So my son asks me, he's like, but how is it's going to be the donkey that Messiah is going to ride? Like, how's the donkey going to be so old? Right. So my response to him, and I'll bring it back to our conversation, was, and I'm sure if you don't, you'll hear now, but I'm sure you also know it, that I said, well, chamor, right? A donkey sounds in Hebrew like chomer, like things. I'm like, and right, look at the world. They're always like, I need to buy this new prime water, and I need to get this new Pokemon. Everyone's always thinking about things. And the chomer is controlling us. I'm like, but Avraham and the story here and Mashiach, the idea is that we, with our relationship to God, we could overcome the material stuff, right? We ride the donkey, we ride the material. Now, the reason I'm explaining that to him right now, because if he gets to political power, I want his vision to be that, and not necessarily that there's a man with a white beard that he's going to tell all the people to do X, Y, Z. There could be a man, and it could be a leader. I'm not like against that. I'm just saying I see that, developing differently. And that also has to do with how I see Israel as a holy place, and how I think like where religion and politics intertwine. So obviously that's been corrupted.
So here's one thing that I think, so coming back to my previous point about seeing the other side, right? The other side of any sort of debate. So John Vervaeke made this point about democracy, that it only works when it's opponent processing and not when it's adversarial processing. And my sense, which relates to basically all our conversations from now, from up until now, is if I look at my view as a secular person, I am comfortable even calling myself an atheist. I don't mind it. If I go like, I don't need anything from religion is useless to me, then even if I stay a really good person, I'm going to have things that grow within my political backyard, right, that I really don't like. And historically, that can be, the Soviet Union or Nazism or whatever. And I think if you do the same, if you go and like, I don't need those atheists, those secular people, and we got this. We know pretty much, we have all of these texts. We know what God wants. Then you're going to have, your own kind of nightmare. And I think that's what Ben Gvir and Smotrich kind of, they're an inkling of, right? Because to disconnect the way that party was hijacked from those sort of trends, right? The religious Zionism basically cut its ties from the kibbutz movement and the secular population, like in general, that it was much closer early on. I think that's a part of that. Like now it's an antagonistic relationship. It wasn't, And it didn't have to become one.
I agree. And this is a problem though, because I think a lot of, let's say, again, I come from different influences. I have like a lot of influences from, let's say, Rav Soloveitchik from the States and modern Orthodoxy, and growing up like in a more brisker mindset. So like I have a lot of that. And obviously I have like, I living in Israel, and my great grandfather is the Talmid of Rav Kook, and I have my affinity to Rav Kook as well. However, I think over the years, a lot of his teachings were hijacked in a certain extent. Even though now you have more, you have uncensored versions coming out with like more context, but generally speaking, while there are people that, and this is also the disagreement between me and Jacob in a certain extent, which is I don't see the secular, and I mentioned this in the past, I don't see the secular as, I don't need this. And you talk about like adversarial processing. Rather, while I may have a different hierarchy, I definitely think, and that's why I'm jumping around. I'm taking a step back. With the Noahites, I say, right? Am Yisrael kelev ba'evarim. Am Yisrael ba'umot kelev ba'evarim. Right? Like we are as a heart as among the nations, right? We are among the nations like a heart is among the body. And the attitude is not that, let's say, we're the best. Rather, like we need the brain to function, we need the lungs to function. We're all together. While we have a central role, we're still all together. And I see that then again within the Israeli society, which is, and this is what Rav Kook does talk about, let's say when Herzl dies and he gives his eulogy, right, where he saw him as Messiah, son of Yosef, and all the elements that go into that. But the elements that go into that, and the reason he doesn't see the secular in Israel as quote unquote unholy, is because he sees the elements in them, which is, this is a new generation of Jews that doesn't want to be ruled by and grabbed by the hand by like what we had for the last 2,000 years of exile. Rather, they want to manifest their religiosity and their connection to God in a more natural form. Now, it could be patronizing that, like, say, in my mind, I see that all is a divine plan. And I see that as, I see all the things that happen in Israel as expressions of that. Of course, we have our own responsibility to play. It's not that God is just making it happen and we're doing nothing, like the famous Pirkei Avot, Hakol Tzafui v'Rashut Natuna, right? So there's a sense that within the board limits, we could do what we want. And, an example of, let's say, the last 10 months was like screwing up royally. Does that mean like good things can't come from that in the end? Like, I have faith. But I believe that's not doing that properly. And like you're alluding to, religious and messianic ideas, right? While I personally see them in a certain sense integrated with politics, if done improperly, or at the very least, if done how practiced by Jews in Europe for a specific period of time, right? And obviously, like he mentions how at a certain point, all the youth groups suddenly become very segregated, men and women, and there's no physical contact anymore, right? So go back to the time of the temple. The men and women are frolicking around the temple. The women are all wearing white. The grabs are great. So there's clearly a disconnect over here, and that is a huge problem. And that is, and like I said at the beginning of this conversation, I totally understand why on the left, or let's say the secular portion of Israel, feels like that not only did they disagree with some of these ideas, or let's say maybe that's not their jam, they're feeling like being attacked by this. And I totally see that. And this goes back to, you said, like, what could be done? I think at this point, what could be done, because you have corrupt leadership, and I think the system is is a problematic system. It's raising mensches. It's raising people to discern, to learn, to pay attention, to have conversations such as this. Like if my sons are aware that I talk to people, quote unquote, on the other side of the aisle, or Christians or Muslims, to have a conversation that's a lot more open and a lot more understanding. And you could argue that on the left, which is, let's say, more, quote unquote, enlightened and more open to dialogue. I would say like within the political system and the media system that has been corroded. And I think within,
I don't disagree generally about the left, except for the fact, like I said, that it's just hard to talk about the left in Israel. I mean, like, what exactly do you mean?
Everyone in Israel should be left in a certain sense. Like, I don't know again about economically, but like, what does left mean to you when you say left?
So the general, like, the only party that I think was a left-wing party in the last years is Meretz, right? And when I say like, what do they represent? Like, for one, it's so yeah. First of all, I should explain, because people are listening to us that are not from Israel, and left and right might be misleading, right? So in Israel, there are two divides mainly between left and right, and that's the hawk-dove divide. Do you have more of a tendency towards peace or towards hawkishness, and also the economic right-left divide, which is kind of classified like more social democratic on Meretz. Now, so yeah, in Israel, generally, like, social democratic ideas have been on the fall for very, very long time. I think practically since 77, right? The dismantling of the Histadrut and all of that. And very few, even within left-wing governments, like even Rabin's government, like there were a lot of much more right-wing economic policies. So yeah, I think there's a place for a lot of policy that has to do with that. I'm not economically naive. I don't think that like we should all be a kibbutz or something. That's ridiculous. But I think in terms of, I think what's more relevant to our discussion, and this goes this interview that you sent me with Ephraim Herrera. You sent me that's about Islam and stuff, right?
Oh yeah, well, that was just, I just think like for ourselves, like everyone in Israel and everyone in the world should just like take these things into consideration. You have to have like this, and this is like a more of a religious context.
So I want to point to that to explain like the position of the left. So in that interview, which was very annoying for several inaccuracies, misuse of statistics, and
I know they have their own bias. Saying that channel has its own bias.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, regardless of biases, like, there are things that tick me off. Like, when someone says there's the Jordan Peterson example, like when an abused child becomes an abusive parent, right? There's that statistic, and then the actual statistic is that most abused parents have been abused as children, but in fact, most abused children do not become abusive parents. And you would get the completely wrong idea from that. And it's the same with their claim about the fact that most terrorists had education or higher education. So obviously, there's no point in educating anyone who's Muslim, which is, for the same reason, a wrong use of that.
It's funny that's like, but like, it's funny that's what you took from that. Like, I just took from that.
That's what they talked about. Like, that's what he and the interviewer agreed on. They said the left wing, they were talking about Amira Hess, they think that if we just give them normal lives, they would be like, everyone wants just to live and prosper, and they don't want that. And here's proof. When they become more educated, they're more likely to continue.
Right. So all I hear is like, someone should check himself before he says that. That's it. Saying like, if we just do this, they'll be fine. They'll be like, it's just not that simple because of all the undergirding things.
I'm just saying like that's a misuse of statistics, and in general, like Herrera ignores secularization in the Muslim world and ignores movements like the Ahmadiyya that are not considered Muslims by Muslims, but like he says, no reform has Muslims generally don't consider the Ahmadiyya Muslims. That's what I'm saying. In any case, he was saying like anyone who tried to offer something more moderate, they all get hung
Get
and
killed, right? So
they
that's
get killed, and that's like, yeah. I mean, if you disregard any example to the contrary, then that's always going to be true.
well, yes. And on the flip side, like what I was just trying to show there is like we need to be serious about the characters we're dealing with, and like you
Sure.
can start
And
different.
what I see, and this is what I think about as left, in this regards to both Hezbollah and Hamas, they were both hubristic attempts of Israel, mostly right wing leaning, right? That's 78 with Hamas, and the Lebanon war in 81 with, maybe before with Hezbollah. I don't remember the details with Hezbollah, but so with Hamas, it was the idea, and definitely throughout the last years, we can play them against each other, right? We don't have to deal with the Palestinian Authority. I don't like the Palestinian Authority. Okay, I don't think they're great people. But to cultivate, to literally pay money to a militant Islamic Jihad organization with the thought that would somehow be something you could control is hubristic beyond belief. And I think that the left in general, if I go back, to my point, in contrast with what Herrera is finishing with, like how us naive leftists should reconsider all our naive notions,
Right.
right? To me, that's like this event points much more to that. Like the left is saying, okay, let's stop fueling the radicals and thinking we can control everything, and let's try to get to a conversation with the moderates when we can and strengthening them. That's the left.
Right. So what my response to that would be that first of all, just like it was very hubristic, right? All those people that like thought that was a good idea, right? They all also think there's going to be their end of the reform. Like there's clearly very smart people made this decision, right? It wasn't like someone's like, this is crazy, Bibi, and he's like, I want to do it anyways, right? There was intel, people told him, there was reports, there was discussions. I'm assuming it wasn't done in a vacuum, right? Like I'm saying, so it's a real problem when you have, let's say, my point being.
No, I want to separate them. I'm not like this isn't about the intelligence failure before October 7th.
I'm not talking about
this is about just let me just get the point. This is about long-term political strategy in the region.
Whose strategy?
Basically, since he was in power most of the time, it's Bibi's.
Yes, but like, do you think he woke up in the morning and decided this, or do you think
I think that
people are giving him information showing that like this could work, this can't
leadership, like with all due respect, leadership has to choose a direction, and then you get the options that either of how you can go about that direction. There is no information. You cannot derive an ought from an is. If you
I agree that
if your goal was stated, right? The goal was stated. We need to delegitimize.
That's not the goal.
Okay, that's the sub goal. That's a subordinate.
Well, what's the goal?
What was the goal of Bibi's government?
Yeah.
Well, that's like
not civilians not dying.
That's up to debate. You could say that's up to debate, but like the sense that I had that it's kind of, I think, what is Kissinger said that Israel doesn't have a foreign policy; it only has internal politics. I think his goal was to stay in power. I think that not pissing off the extreme settlers was more important than a long-term solution. And I think like when you watch, for instance, Shomer Asaf, the series with the Shin Bet heads talking about their periods in there, they were talking about the governments throughout history, and this includes the Rabin government with his bullshit, right? Did not have in general, or it doesn't include him in that sense, but includes him in other senses, did not have strategic thought about like where are we going 10, 20, 30 years. It was just
not have that with the Abraham Accords. I'm going to forgo. You could say it was mistaken, but he has a very, 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 very clear objective. Israel needs to be powerful economically, so it can be powerful technologically, so it can then make deals across the region and force peace on the ground. And he's been extremely successful in that. 1,001 things he did wrong. He shouldn't be prime minister. He pulled that from A to B to C.
So again,
he's at that place.
The way I see it, again, and this is like a disagreement on how we interpret the things we see on the ground. The way I see that is like wrapping up the what he was bound by, the things that interested him politically, by a lot of fancy words. And I mean, the Abraham Accords are a tough one. Like, what do they mean? Do they have meaning? Are they really helping us? Are they meaningless? I don't know.
Like how can they be meaningless? Like coming to the left, like someone from the left, like you should be just dancing, just like yay, yay, peace with the Arabs, yay, but nothing.
Peace with the Arabs that we're not at war with.
So what? Those are the increments. Those people used to hate you. Now they don't hate you. Now they see you. And I would argue this is just like, like the conversation we have about peace or what's going to be in Gaza, or like, we want to have peace. Most Israelis want to have peace. That's the game. And the Harari video is, my point being is, our ideologies can play with the Muslims. Muslims' ideology in many senses can't play well with others at the end. And like his Harari line was like, I think it's important to mention when he says, oh, there's like a jihad of the hearts. Any religious Muslim doesn't actually think that's what it means. The majority doesn't think that. And we have to take that into consideration, like what they mean. Like you'd be like, well, Ben-Gvir, when he says like, when Smotrich comes and says he has a little map that shows of greater Israel, right? That's bananas. You should believe him that that's what he wants. And that's a problem. But he's a minority with like the people, and you could be like arguably like not now he's on the levels of power. That's where it becomes problematic. I'm with you. But when people give an example of like, there was like the blood wedding where they were singing like death to Arabs, or there was Jews went to watch the bombing of Gaza, like and they ate popcorn from Sderot.
Where are you going generally? I'm just not.
I'm going with this thing. I'm saying that these things were condemned, and the things that are highlighted are us constantly, when we can, striving for peace. So when you see a government like, you could look at a government of Bibi and saying like, we just made peace with these nations, right? So you could be like, well, I guess we shouldn't say that you hate Arabs or that you're racist, because like then you wouldn't be doing those things. Or you could be like, no, he still is, but this is a power agenda. Okay, then that's the narrative we could look at it. So even if there was peace with the Palestinians, really there's like an agenda. And my question is like, what is it? What is the thing that people are happy with? Like, what is it that you want to see when you say, is it a real peace? Like, okay, what do you want to do?
Look, I think like the peace with Egypt and the peace with Jordan were real peace, cold peace, right? Like this, right? Not warm relations, but those were countries that we were actually at war with and have signed agreements, and now we're not fighting them, right? And when you're talking about nations that we were not fighting, like to say that it could have an influence on reality on the ground, that would be great, and I would be happy. And I didn't say the Abraham Accords are necessarily meaningless. I just don't know. I don't know how to calibrate from
the calibration is just good. It's a net positive. It's just towards the right direction. It's to show the world this is
resources are limited, and if we spent more resources on that we could have spent on, let's say, supporting moderates in our region, and trying to lower the flames in the conflicts that we actually have with people that are just our neighbors, whether we like it or not, then yeah, it's a net positive, but not what it should have been. Like not nearly as useful as making peace with people here. And the general reluctance, right, to engage with any, not even like peace, any long-term solution with the people here, right? I don't know what the idea of forcing peace on the Palestinians means. I don't know what is imagined by that. Like, in what sense is peace is a forced peace?
Them losing hope.
What?
Them realizing there's never, ever, ever going to be a one-state solution, and realizing that you missed out multiple deals with a lot of land. Take what you can get, because the world is passing by. That's what it means, force. It means like if you still want it to be a relevant issue, you need to move. You need to make a decision, Palestine. Do you want to fight Israel forever, or do you want to play nice? And it sounds ridiculous, but the idea, and why they also call it normalizations and not peace, because of these elements. Because if we call it peace, it's going to cause more pressure. I mean, it's going to cause more tensions. So you have this normalization, which you're trying to show to the Arab world, and even with Turkey, right before the war, we were getting closer with again. And there's a sense that everyone is trying to create some sort of workable relationship in the region, right? But there's still this element over here, and people said, and Kerry said, and other people said, it's not possible. No one's going to make peace with you, but that was movement. And the idea was that it's movement, and why I think it's the right direction, it's because it's specifically with people that share the same faith. It's specifically with people that say they want the same thing, right? They want the things for Palestine. So you're talking and you're bringing in more partners that maybe one of these people, which we see now in the war, no one has raised up, right? Qatar, none of these people want to take responsibility for the Palestinians that they're so worried about. But
yeah, but that's the thing about the Palestinians, and that's why I don't have that much faith. Like on the face of it, right? Like I'm not an expert, but on the face of it, the Palestinians are generally the garbage bin of the Arab world. Like they like to use their plight to forward their own political agendas, but they don't care. No one cares about them. Like they are screwed from every direction. That doesn't justify their
we care
barbarity.
We care because we said like, hey, let's split the land, and then we said like, hey, let's split the land again, and then we said like, let's do it again, and then we said like, let's do it again. We care. We keep on trying to make it happen. And did Israel create war crimes in some places? Yes. Did Israel shouldn't? Yeah. It's you and I both know it's a joke. It's nothing. That's not the real problem. So I have no problem self-flogging and saying yeah, Israel did mistakes, but we're not a racist country. We want to work with Palestinians. We can't wait to have peace. And to me, it's when we're talking about, let's say, the left or the right, there's a sentiment where this is again as another extreme, because are there innocent people in Gaza? Of course. Are all Muslims bad? Of course not. But when you hear about the irony of the people that were massacred, right, were massacred potentially by the assistance of people that they would allow them to come in and work in their places, and they gave their mapping to the people to kill them, and they're the people that went waiting by the fence to take some people from Gaza and take them to the hospitals, and realizing that that is the person you're dealing with. And you have to also realize at the end of the day, the radicalization that goes on over there and the people you're dealing with. And you could live in this world where if we just, and that goes back to the Harari thing, if we just give them our Western values, they're not interested in them, even if they're in the best conditions. We're playing a different game. But
what did I say? What I was saying is, considering that those are the values and beliefs of the Islam, especially the most devout ones, especially the ones that are outwardly jihadi, right? There has to be a scale, right? secular people. You have Arab doctors in Israel, right? Generally, I wouldn't say that they are the most jihadi Islamist people and their doctors.
Right.
Generally, there are people, that are much more close to our values and to our way of life. And the idea, again, that you would try to support and pit the extremists against the more secular ones, and not even against slightly less extreme but still quite extreme. To me, that is so messed up, right? That is such a bad idea. I don't understand how that could be.
I agree that in retrospect, we're looking at that as like, what on earth were you thinking? My point was,
not in retrospect. This was the same with Hezbollah, right? We never would have thought that, supporting this organization.
Well, like I'm saying, I don't have the information in front of me. I don't know what the plan, that the 7-point plan out that they had of like why this makes sense. I'm with you that like the hubris they had on that. Okay, that doctor. The problem is, and I'm using an example, my daughter goes to a kindergarten that's like a mixed kindergarten. And part of the staff is Arab. One of them was fired because she was posting all about supporting Hamas, right? So that doctor, right, if push comes to shove, is he also down to the river from the sea? And you can be like, well, those are his opinions. I don't mind if someone's like, he's pro-abortion, against abortion. I'm less down with like someone like, really, I wish you weren't here at all. Because I don't think that.
That's where I'm saying, like, we talked about this in the first conversation, right? The when push comes to shove, when you talked about like the construction workers that you work with, and that they would throw you off the roof.
Right.
And I'm saying, like, there are people that had, plenty of opportunities when push came to shove, and they clearly, made their stand. And I think,
and you're right, and that's why we have and like we were discussing, that's why we have the Palestinians that want to thrive in this country can thrive in this country. They can, and like we say that 1,000 times, and we express it to the world, and I would say that is,
and then our policy in terms of Gaza and the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority and Hamas is exactly the opposite of that. We not just by our actions, but definitely by our actions as well, we show that violence is the way to get stuff from us, and we support the more extremists over the less extremists, right? Those are the things that, like, when I look at the policy, you were talking about what the left is, right? So that's what I'm saying. We can disagree. That's okay, right? And I'm not sure exactly where we differ. I think where you focus where you look at, I don't know if we differ on like agreeing like what's wrong or what's better, but it seems like where our attention is focused is where we differ. But
I don't know if we even differ there necessarily of like where our attention is focused. It has to do also like how you and I are in a certain sense also perceiving like reality. When you talk about moderates, it's like, what do we mean by moderates? And when we talk about like, okay, what is the viability of those moderates to actually raise to power and get to power? Like, it doesn't help us that Mahmoud Abbas doesn't want to find any real successor, right? I don't think there's I don't think Israel is saying like, I know that there's other opportunities. I just don't want to, I take that back. It depends obviously by the government. I definitely think that like in this government, there's definitely, forget post October 7th, pre-October 7th. I don't think there was like a lot of sentiment of like, hey, let's get back to that peace talk conversation. Understood.
Do you think that was really like, my view is that that's been the case for previous governments, for several previous governments.
And that's why I see Bennett working together with when he brought in what's his name? The Arab Party. Why am I blanking out? Abbas.
Abbas.
Right? that looked to me like, you know, those were like, again, data points or elements of when I'm like, oh, this is like redemptive time, like working together, right? Bringing in.
I would be very happy to see real and fruitful cooperation of Arab parties in Israeli politics. And I think it's one of the, let's say, sticks in our wheels that these are parties that are in the Knesset but never actually participate in the political game. Like that is a very, I think that's a very negative phenomenon.
So when I saw that he reached across the aisle and brought him in, to me, that was, and that also to me was like another part of like why I was okay with the fact that he became prime minister with so little votes, was because my attitude was like, okay, you're willing to like risk it all and try to make something like new work. So like I'm down for that, because like we need to get like out of a muck. We need to move forward. And that's why I said like I would be in theory okay with like voting for, let's say, someone on the left if I felt, and that alludes to you saying like, well, I felt like, you know, the left doesn't exist. If I saw someone that I'm like, oh, a leader, right? Like this, take me to the next stage, right? And it's less about like, sure, don't give the ultra orthodox their money right now, or like no problem. We could decide to differ on my values because I want to move forward. I didn't see that. I didn't see anyone close to that. And
yeah, me neither. Unfortunately, I just and that's a part of, I think, maybe the essence of not anyone but Bibi, but also the the anti-Trump camp in a way, right? Because I think like that sentiment or that grievance that I have, right, regardless of the fact that I can say like there's a lack of leadership, and I do have some hope for Yair Golan, and I hope he'll actually show up and be something better. But hope is for the future.
yeah, but like you're saying, you're saying your grievance though. That
Yeah, I was saying my grievance, like that some limits, when they're crossed, should be a red line, and a red line means the government disbands.
I agree, the government is bad, and I agree.
I mean, in all the previous ones, like 10 months at least, but even before
I agree that also 10 months ago it was a bad government. I agree. I think the way that I mean, I would say like within like month 2, the second they saw that, like it was 2 huge mistakes. One, they saw that like it wasn't a passing phase, and 2, because you could argue like people are allowed to protest, but like if like it died down after 2 months, I guess like that's like the sentiment. Number 2 was the fact to like after those 2 months to decide to like double down and like activate like even more stuff. So like all those were all obviously indicators of like red lights warning. So and again, my red light warning wasn't like, oh shit, it's gonna turn into like a fascist state. My warning was like, this is completely unfunctional. The country is gonna get like ripped apart. This is gonna be like very bad for Israel.
But do you see like how the, like, personally, I didn't think that it was going to become a fascist state because I didn't think they were competent enough to do it. But it does look like the goal, right? Like, do you see why?
Do you think that? Do you think that Bibi wants to be like I'm asking seriously, like a dictator, and he wants it to become a fascist state? And then once you start asking those questions, so like and to be clear, we're having a thought experiment, but like then like is Yigal Amir so crazy because like it's Hitler? I mean, it's the bad guy that's going to destroy the country. Like everything is okay to stop. We could not fly, we could not bomb, we could not pay taxes, we could go on the street. Like all ends justify the means. That's it. We got to get rid of him. And that kind of thinking, which I'm not saying you're doing or not saying people in Israel are doing, why
are we going there, right? Like, because that's
the reason I'm going there is because when you say like I didn't think it was going to become a dictatorship because I don't think they were competent. All I hear is like, and if they were competent, they were trying to do that. And I hear, if you think they were trying to do that, then we're living in different realities, because like Bibi should be fired. he is not.
Why do you think it was so important to push that reform right now, even though it was like mentioned, I think twice in their election campaign? It had such a huge backlash.
I mean, Yariv
There
Levin
were
wanted to do that for years.
so many
Yes.
more pressing issues. The trials that Netanyahu has, the fact that the first law they passed was the Chok HaNivtzarut, the inadequacy law, so that he couldn't be removed from power. Like the level of just actions that go towards that, the level of examples that you have from other populist leaders coming to power in Brazil and Hungary and Poland, right? It was just the same playbook except done incompetently.
But who? Right? And maybe it could be I'm very wrong, but like the way I see it is like the people of Israel, right? They don't want that. Like even the people that voted for him, they don't want a dictatorship.
Okay, but
they don't
first
want.
Of all,
if
they really didn't, but that's the thing, right? I don't think it necessarily happens because everyone really wants it. I think it just escalates towards that, and I think like that slippery slope is real, and it has happened. So yeah, I think when you have a government that is effectively untethered from the balance by the other authorities, and I guess you agree with me that the Knesset is not a balance, not a check against government power, because once they have a majority, they can pass whatever law they want with 64 mandates.
It's a little more, yes, generally speaking, correct, yeah.
Right, like that's not a check once it becomes that way, and so we are in a very kind of warped situation compared to other countries where like there is very little oversight on government action, and the ones that are left, our judiciary, they are problematic. I don't love our system, but those are the ones that are left, and the legislation in its totality was going to pretty much make that irrelevant, right? Because for a lot of reasons, I won't get into the.
I mean, obviously they'll argue, which I don't agree with a lot of this argument, but like they were trying to restore a certain sort of balance, right, to it. But I think you would agree, maybe you won't, that like, you're alluding to like, yes, the system's not perfect, and maybe even if it was like a different person running this show, we would be more down for it. But I think it was a combination also of like what they were doing and who are the people like involved. You'd be like, obviously, that's always a case of like, it takes two to tango. But I've been saying this since we've been talking, just a lot of it, right? The not just Bibi and like the whole story, like the boogeyman story around that also, I think, created like a false narrative of what's.
I think if it were Yair Lapid doing the same things, I would have the same response. I don't know if all the protests would happen, if the pilots would do it. I don't know. But for me, personally, right, and I don't mean to be kind of self-righteous about it. I'm trying to judge from cases in which that has happened to me. Right? When you see the things that don't align, and the example I can have is like around global warming, when you see world leaders saying that it's a doomsday scenario and then not promoting nuclear power, you're like, this doesn't add up. Like, I don't know what it means, but I have to have a different explanation, because I can't take them at face value if their actions are so contradicting to their statements. So I'm saying, like, in this case, I don't think it would matter who the people are. Like, it gives context to like what the motivation is, what what are the conditions that allow for it, why the different members of this government are all supporting it, like this kind of perfect storm. You can explain why it's happening, right? And no one's stopping it. But basically, right, I'm looking at that and going like, is this a judicial reform meant to deal with real problems in the judicial system, and I'm looking at anyone who's, a very, strong critic of the judicial system, written books about it, and they're saying, no, these are people who want to change the regime, the way the regime works. These are people that want to create a deep change in Israeli society, and they're not interested in anything of what we wrote about and what we're criticizing. So I look at that and I'm like, if they really cared about that, if that was their agenda, how does that contradiction come about?
Well, I'm assuming, I don't know, did you listen to any of the thoughts of the people in Forum Kohelet? Or like, are they all nincompoops?
I've listened to them, and I felt like, the general the general impression is quite similar to what the experts from that were talking about the judicial system were discussing,
which is there's room for improvement. Things need to change. This is the wrong way to do it.
No. What I'm saying is that the people from Forum Kohelet had generally the idea that the way that the things that are thwarting their agenda, which they have, are this judicial system, and that it somehow works. It's stopping us from doing the things that we should be doing. And I'll finish with one point, is that within all of their discussions, the way Yoav Datan Manny Mauntner talked about it, the legislator is like a perach mugan, like how do you say, like
a protected species.
Yeah, protected species, right? They talk about all the examples, all the things they discuss, like the fact that the Supreme Court interferes with the Israel award. And it's like, you didn't legislate that. You could have. And the court is saying, why don't you just legislate it so we don't have to deal with this every time when someone makes an appeal about the Israel award? You could just specify it, right? And the
they'll argue that if they specify it, right, they're gonna the courts will give them a hard time with that. Which there's been cases where the government comes in, the court says no, the government says this, the court says no. They read into this thing. We don't read the law. We don't interpret the law the way you do.
This goes back to the gains you were talking about, because if we're talking about the Sudani infiltrators or work immigrants, like the illegal work immigrants from Eritrea and Sudan, which were there was a lot of thing about the Supreme Court with that, right? The level of cynicism, right, involved in that, when you see just there is judiciary counseling for the offices that make these law proposals, like Ayelet Shaked, and they're just going against that to be dismissed from the courts, to have their proposal dismissed, because they don't want to take the responsibility, but they like the populist position of saying, like, oh, we wanted to help, but those damn courts, those damn elites sitting there, and they don't care about you, right? Like there is so much that the legislature can do, and like that they are intentionally doing in a way, like, because most of the cases and most of the time, like, the Supreme Court would say, okay, you can do this, but this doesn't coincide with this principle, and that principle, doesn't get upheld in there. And those are problems, because we will need to, judge these cases. And since these are basic principles, there would be contradictions. So, like, please resolve the contradictions. There are professionals who can do that. And, we offer this law. Yes, there were cases of overreach. Not arguing that, but the way, like,
I want to just say the overreach, right, which, regardless that it's inappropriate, right, and regardless that, let's say, something that needs to be fixed, is a reaction to right? The agendas that, let's say, the right is pushing forward. Now, it's wrong overreach. However, the left, right, feels, and the courts feel, and I would say the sentiment of, let's say, the courts being more left leaning, which I don't think is like a controversy to say, is
It is.
do you really think that it's a controversy to say that the courts are more left leaning? That doesn't mean there aren't right Supreme Court
No,
justices.
I don't think they are left leaning. Generally speaking, I think like if you look at their verdicts, if you look at their jurisprudence, I don't think you'll see that. Like the way that left wing people I know, or writers and people who talk about it, they say that the Supreme Court, as they call it, has kol sheretz, that the government.
So interesting that they're defending it so vehemently. Then, like, if it's like just like
that's what I'm saying. But that's what I'm saying. Like that is another part where you're saying like there is a lot of reason, even just like recently when the Smolanim Bogdim campaign came out, the Supreme Court said, oh, that's fine. That's not incitement to violence, right? There are many cases where you can just like pinpoint exactly the way in which the Supreme Court and the courts in general are not left-leaning. And like it comes to show that, or it's presented in many ways in the fact that many times the judges and the legal practitioners in different offices and the Supreme Court are actually elected for so many years by right-wing governments, and not like default, right? Candidates that they're happy with, that they brag about. And then they go like, oh,
I mean, specifically, I mean, you're alluding to the argument that like Ayelet Shaked, the former Justice Minister, already put in mechanisms into play to I don't know about ensure, but better fortify the fact that there would be, let's say, a more even keel situation over there. And a lot of the critics from the left were saying, like, why don't you just let that play its course? Like, you've already done your tinkering, and like let that do its thing. So yeah, there's
I'm saying more than that. I'm saying like that the claims, for instance, like that the left wing is vehemently defending the courts is because the courts are pro-left or pro whatever ethnicity the left is, or anything like that, right? Yeah, you can find ulterior motives wherever you want, but I don't think that those things align, right? I don't think that when you look at the facts, when you look at the reality on the ground, it just doesn't add up to get there. And again, I don't think it would be different if different people were to do it, for me.
I don't mind having this discussion as a separate discussion. I think there's more nuance there with regards to like where I would identify the court system, but not getting bogged down by that. I'm trying to remember like what was my point about mentioning like the court system though. Yes, that. I think a lot. Why I think the things that are undergirding this and why a lot of this bubbled up is because I don't think people came on the streets, right, because of the economic plan that Israel had, right? Like we also saw like with the housing crisis, like it only lasted so long in a certain sense. And why I agree with you, this was like more fundamental was because I think the attack was quote unquote on democracy. Right. But, and again, I want to say that it's not that, and maybe some people did, or I'm sure many people did. I don't think, and you don't think that like because it was going to turn into a dictatorship or that Bibi's like now, like, a dictator. However, the way they wanted to yield their power, right. And the way they were going to be, sorry, go ahead.
It's just there's things like I said, when I see, and that was a really tough day, when I see police in uniform protesting against their own investigators, and realizing how weakened the internal investigations has become, and how the police are sort of unreined, right? That is not an element of a healthy democracy, right? Like,
I'm with you, but who are you laying the blame on for the fact that, like, 1 second, are you talking about when like Ben Gvir sent like the cops to go outside the courthouse while they were like investigating other cops?
So I don't think Ben Gvir sent them. Ben Gvir supported them.
Please, 1 second. Sorry. Hey, what's up? Oh, come, go back into bed, buddy. Come, lie down. I'll come cuddle with you soon. Go lie down. Soon.
Yeah, we'll finish up soon.
So what specific case were you talking about?
So when the Yair Hanuna, the cop who was investigated for beating up that 18-year-old kid, when he was going to internal affairs, there was all of his unit, Niyasam, were parking, like blocking half of the street, parking right across the street, standing there in uniform as a part of their working day, showing support, right? They didn't say that they were openly protesting, but like, this is, legally speaking, shibush halichei chakirat. It's like interfering with an ongoing investigation, and they were supported by the Minister of National Security, the one in charge of the police. And
horrible.
And that, to me, right? You say you don't think that he's a dictator. I don't think he's a dictator. I think we are on that slope, and we are not at the start of that slope. Like that point is really low, right? Because then I can't trust the police, right? I really don't know if I can trust them. If I go to a protest and there's a water cannon, I don't know if they don't follow the rules already, and they're not being tried for that, right? And then if I'm an 18-year-old kid that, whatever, let's say he broke the law. I don't know exactly what he did, but it's well documented. Put cuffs on him, walk him to the car. Why are you beating him? Right? There were pictures of cops just making a wall to prevent cameramen from seeing them beating up civilians.
I'm saying, but I would say, is that indicative?
Those are signs of a slide towards non-democracy, right? Those are signs that, to me, I see that and I say, we are much farther gone than I thought.
Which country doesn't have this?
Which country doesn't have this?
England has this. America has this. Canada has this. Like, are you saying this is a trend? This is a trend in the cops, in the police, or this is like I'm with you all up until the point of saying, like, it's deplorable, it's disgusting, and it's even worse.
The fact that the police do that in certain cases, sure. The fact that when you have evidence and there is a public case and internal affairs is involved, that, first of all, no one is that justice doesn't get served, let's say, no one is really accused for what they did, and that the police can then come and like make a show of force towards the investigators, just like standing in uniform during their workday to support.
You're right. That's disgusting. However, all I would see that is, I wouldn't see that as a trend. I would just see that as a horrible thing and just another reason why Ben Gvir shouldn't be in power. Not that our police system is corrupt.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't know what to say. You have, first of all, Ami Eshad was saying directly that he was told to by Ben Gvir.
You're right. He should be gone. I don't see that meaning that the police in Israel are corrupt. I see that
agree. As the police not corrupt. I see that as the police being aligned with whatever the government tells them to do, rather than what the law tells them to do.
Well, I would say a healthy example of that was those people decided to step down, right?
Who?
There's police chiefs that decided, like, I can't work with Ben Gvir anymore. It's not going to work. I can't.
And then they were replaced by those who would.
By 1 second, by those who think, right? There's one person that believed, right? That this is. I disagree with what's going on over here from a moral case, from a legal case, right? And there's people that you could be like they're legally they're deplorable, or they see things differently, right? Or they have a different interpretation of what is going on over here. Or so, it's just like there's people on the streets, and just like there's people protesting, and just like there's all this pressure, like all that is part of the process, which is like if those things weren't happening, yeah, like I would be super worried, right? But like those things are happening. And like you,
but again, they happened in places like, I don't know if we agree on this, but I hope we do, that Hungary has slid into
the things I meant about happening was like the protests. Like
okay.
there's a dance, as in like you're saying like they were getting too close to the edge, right?
I'm
Like the
saying they were
government
breaking the law. The police was doing things that they should not have been doing by the law, and then when they should have been tried on it, when one central figure was going to be tried on that, they were interfering with that investigation by, making a show of force outside that building. Right?
So I would agree that that's horrible. My point being, there's also like there's Kav Shloshma. Like there's other cases where things like this, where there's cover-ups inside the police, specifically inside the
Yeah,
police.
but this is different because it's broad daylight, right? That's what I'm trying to say, right? When I see that the cop beat up that kid, I'm saying like, man, that's terrible. And now, if I'm confident in my country, I'm saying like that cop is going to be removed from the force, and he's going to have all of his credits removed, or whatever, right? Whatever the right thing in that situation is. In our case, internal affairs has been completely weakened, and it's almost non-threatening to them, to the extent that they're confident enough to just go and I don't know, bully them. What is that protest like when they're investigated for the things they shouldn't do, and they go and protest against it? I interpret that as saying like, we're not bound to the law. We're bound to what our commander tells us to do.
Well, specifically, if I understand correctly, you're saying the fact that display happened, if I understand correctly now, is that it's less that like it happened as in this is something that they were embarrassed about, and then it's like a one-off that like you basically remove, rather than this was a confident display, which indicates that how far they have strayed basically from true north,
Absolutely.
so to speak.
Absolutely.
So I could accept that would be an example of a worrying sign. I understand like what you're pointing out right now, so I could agree with that. That would be like a worrying sign. I believe, right, and you could say like that's my point though. I believe that is not indicative of the police. That's indicative of, let's say, the power behind the police in that case, which is Ben Gvir, right? Which is like obviously to be fair to the cops, let's say, if they're being told by him that like I'm completely supporting you and what the cop did wasn't wrong at all and you're totally fine, then they might be thinking like, oh, then why is this happening? Like, why are they checking into us? And obviously, again, the blame would be on both of them on both sides to confirm Ben Gvir for giving improper commands and the cops for not recognizing what the problem with that is.
The signs that were appearing were that Ben Gvir wants the protest to be violently suppressed, and that the police was going towards that line step by step. Just before October 7th, they were already promoting the permission to fire live rounds at protesters, right? They, when
that didn't happen. Though. That wasn't approved, though. You're right. He had a crazy thing that he wanted to do. I don't think that was approved.
No, I mean that didn't get tabled yet. It was in the process, but like more and more severe means were used, and again, these could have resulted in people's deaths. You saw people getting hit by the water cannons, right? Getting their heads bashed into security rails and the.
Yes, and there was complete anarchy in the streets, and you can't allow that. Absolutely, you can't allow that. No one could block the highway. No one could burn anything. You can't stop any ambulances. Zero tolerance for that. Protests for the next 30 years. You can't block a highway. You just can't do it. Now, Does that mean we bash heads? No. What do you do in this? In a certain way, obviously, we're very different. Like there's law needs to be upheld, right?
There's law and it needs to be upheld. There is certain borders, like when public order is disturbed to some extent, that is,
Should be
I
contained.
think it's contained, and it's like it's something that happens when you talk about, let's say, first of all, no
Heads
ambulance.
get, by the way, heads get cracked. That's something that happens. Protesters, like in Vietnam and throughout whole history, shouldn't assume that they're not going to get their head cracked sometimes, because that's what happened to all protesters. So I'm not saying it's good. Just someone that protests should assume he's going to get arrested. Not like, how are they doing this? But you broke the law for the right reasons. Way to go. You're a freedom fighter. Obviously.
I agree that like when the system is unjust, then just people belong in jail. Like I don't argue with that. Like that we should be willing to pay the price. But the borders, like when you say, okay, you can have a protest within bounds, and those bounds were, I think, very clear by all of the law about by the law, I would say, and by the people who talked about it, right? The legal counsel, the judges, right? There cannot be any looting. There cannot be any damage to property. There cannot be any
and no blocking highways.
Attacks on cops. In terms of blocking highways, right? That was something discussed legally, right? And the conclusion was that is not something that can be allowed to continue for a long time. It's not something that can be just complete anarchy, but it is something that is within containable bounds, and it doesn't warrant, like when you see just some woman sitting with her back to the water cannon, getting hit by it and having her head bashed into the security rail.
Yeah, but horrible. On a whole, so much patience from the cops and the government with the amount of disobedience there was. It's just, it's 100%.
I'm sorry.
Hours and hours for months and months and months and months. The highways are closed.
Look, the reason, like the fact that this came for months and months, and the fact that this was grueling for the cops, I'm not arguing. Like that, I'm not envious of any cop that had to withstand that situation. I think like there's a lot of responsibility on the government and on the state to find ways to lower the flames in this kind of situations. But like when I say, like when you say there's so much patience, right? Look, these are the least violent protesters you could imagine.
It has nothing to do with violence. It has to do with, it has to do with the fact, first of all, it was very difficult for the quote unquote right to deal with like people blocking highways and streets in a much smaller proportion due to the disengagement. And they were arrested for a very long time and detained for a very, very long time, to a tremendous amount of tolerance on that end. Secondly, just now protester A, right, decides to push cop, right? It's okay. It's just not okay. Yell, scream, do. And the attitude was like, I have to believe you saw this on the street. Like, I don't think there was mayhem, like there was looting, but the country was hijacked. Think about when they threatened to close the airport. That is bananas. Bananas. Just, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the government wants. We are just shutting this country down.
The fact that it gets to that, right? The fact that you cannot, like,
I blame the media and I blame people completely.
No. With all due respect, right? To say, right, you should just let us do whatever we want.
Legally.
Like, what does civilian population, if even it's not even a majority, actually it's 48% because of the mandate system. So 48% of government comes into power and now wants to pass laws that are completely bananas, right?
Well,
like,
according
let's
to
say
who?
that's the case, right?
Yeah.
Right. A civil protest that is trying to be nonviolent, right? What levers does it have? Does it just stay silent and go like?
No,
Okay.
it doesn't. It doesn't say solid. Elect someone else.
Look, the thing is, if you really see that this government was elected and actually has the power to change the system, change the game, make it so, and it has happened in other countries, make it so it wouldn't be viable or possible to elect someone else. Yeah.
Well, the argument would be that's the narrative that's being painted, but that's not necessarily the truth.
Let's put it like this. It's a question, let's say hypothetically, right? You could always have uncertainty. Maybe it's not true.
You're right. So because of the uncertainty, you protest, you don't shut down the country, and you don't lock
But if they
down
won't listen, if you look at the cases where it happened and you go like, okay, so there's lots of protesters on the street. We got the police, we got the power. They can't do anything. Let's just run with our plan to take over the country.
Well, first of all, that 1 second. The reason
if we're in a hypothetical state,
and the reason I have police is to allow me to do the things I want to do legally and not be stopped by people that might not like it just because they don't like it. Right? I have to create law and order. The laws that I created right now my cop needs to decide now at 6 o'clock, all noise stops. You might not like that, but that's the cops are going to enforce my new law that all noise starts at 6 o'clock. And I was elected and that was legal for me to do. And now noise stops at 6. You can be like, but I don't want that to stop.
What is the limit? What can't you legislate?
First of all, for sure there's a limit. And there is a very robust argument right now being like, what are they doing? And you can come and say like, they should fight that. And the opposition is fighting that. And they're bringing in like US pressure and saying like, we should do all that's true. Then there's other people that live in this country that they want to just go, I have a doctor's appointment. I want to go out. So you could be protesting. Why is my highway blocked? Why can't I get my kid to kindergarten? Why can't I leave? You don't understand. Like the country, well, I don't understand. I voted for this guy. And I want to go to work. The country's completely falling apart. So the question then would be like, you know what? I'm with you. Now they're not allowing me to buy red socks. I'm just think of the ultra orthodox, right? You're going to have to join the army. We're blocking the highways. We're going out there. We're just doing whatever we want. We're going to just shut the country down. We're going to block the airport and we're not leaving the airport until we get what we want. And you're going to be like, well, that's crazy. Like the cops should arrest him. Whoa. Cops arresting me, knocking my head. I just think the country's completely changed its face, and I can't allow it to happen. So I'm just going to shut down everything. I'm just going to shut it all down, and that's it. So, like, the problem was that
you understand, but do we agree that there are cases where that would be the moral thing to do?
I would think that would be the moral thing to do. More than that, but I think if, like, you thought, right, that it's worth shutting down the government, it's worth shutting down the airport, yeah? And like you said, like it's worth not joining the army, just like, just take your kids out of school and just like go to the Knesset and like, this is the fight for your life. Why are you even going to work? What are you talking about? Like, this is the enemy. This is like the worst person in the world. Fight. Stop him.
Or fight as wisely as you can.
Right.
Because probably if you take your kid, you go to the Knesset, right? You wouldn't have enough, traction. You wouldn't be able to make it stop. So try to find a way to stop it, right?
Right. So
I'm just saying, hypothetically, there's a point in which when you look at the situation, like you have to do that. I see like you have to go because I see you looking.
Yeah, my son came back out. To be continued.
All right.
I don't know if the grievance lessened or thickened, but I'll talk.
I think it's okay either way. So see you next time.
We'll talk. Bye. Hi, everyone, for joining. Sorry we didn't interact with the comments, but this will be continued. So we'll get you. Nechama, great to see you. Upcycle, Gavin, Sherry, Garth, Gavin, Luke, Dan. Serious crowd over here.